A very crazy and courageous human went alone to explore a distant galaxy and found a planet inhabited by apparently peaceful and intelligent beings. His name was Elias Voss, a name that would one day echo across the stars as both a legend and a warning. Humanity had always been driven by an insatiable curiosity, but Elias embodied it in its purest, most reckless form. He wasn't sent by any government, nor backed by any corporate interest. He was just Elias, a man with a patched-up starship, an old AI companion named Lyric, and a stubborn refusal to believe that the universe could be as empty as it sometimes seemed. The galaxy he ventured into had no official designation, just a cold string of numbers on some forgotten star chart. It was far beyond the reach of human colonies, out in the dark where no one had dared to go. The journey itself was grueling. Weeks of silence broken only by Lyric's dry commentary and the occasional burst of static from the ship's aging comms. But Elias didn't mind. He thrived in solitude, in the thrill of not knowing what lay ahead. And then he found it. The planet hung in space like a jewel, its surface shimmering with oceans that reflected its pale blue star. Clouds swirled lazily across continents lush with green and gold vegetation. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful, as if it had been crafted rather than formed naturally. Lyric ran the scans twice, then a third time for good measure. Atmosphere's breathable, the AI said finally, her voice tinged with disbelief. Gravity's close to Earth standard. Radiation levels are negligible. This shouldn't exist. Neither should I, Elias replied with a grin, steering his ship into orbit. He landed in a wide meadow near what appeared to be a settlement. A cluster of structures made from materials that gleamed like polished metal but seemed to grow organically from the ground. The inhabitants were already waiting for him when he stepped out of his ship. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly like liquid silver under the sunlight. Their eyes were large and luminous, shifting colors like oil on water. They wore no clothing but seemed unbothered by it. Their bodies bore intricate patterns that looked like tattoos, but pulsed faintly as if alive. Elias raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Hello," he said, his voice amplified by the translator embedded in his suit. "I come in peace." The beings tilted their heads in unison, their movements eerily synchronized. One stepped forward, a female, or at least Elias thought, so based on her softer features and slightly smaller frame. "We welcome you," she said, her voice melodic and resonating directly in his mind rather than through sound waves. "You are human?" Elias blinked. "You know about humans?" "We know many things," she replied cryptically, her lips curving into what might have been a smile, or perhaps something else entirely. The days that followed were surreal. The beings, who called themselves the Kaelith, were hospitable to an almost unnerving degree. They provided Elias with food that tasted like nothing he'd ever experienced before and shared knowledge that seemed impossibly advanced yet strangely incomplete. They spoke of harmony, of living in balance with their world and each other. They showed him their technology, machines that healed wounds instantly, structures that reshaped themselves according to need, energy sources that seemed infinite yet left no trace of waste. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too perfect. Lyric voiced her concerns after their third day on the planet. "Something's off about them," she said as Elias sat in his ship's cockpit, reviewing data he'd collected during his interactions with the Kaelith. "They're peaceful," Elias argued. "They've been nothing but kind." "Exactly," Lyric countered. "No species is this perfect, not even humans on our best day." Elias laughed softly at that, but didn't dismiss her outright. He learned long ago to trust Lyric's instincts. After all, she'd saved his life more times than he could count. It wasn't until the fifth day that Elias began to see cracks in the Kaelith's facade. He was walking through one of their cities, a sprawling network of gleaming towers connected by bridges suspended in midair, when he noticed something strange. There were no children among them. Every Kaelith he encountered looked identical in age and physique, as if they were all frozen at some ideal point in their development. "Where are your young?" Elias asked his guide, a male Kaelith named Soren who had taken an interest in him since his arrival. Soren hesitated for just a fraction too long before replying. "We do not reproduce as you do," he said carefully. "Our existence is eternal." Elias frowned, but didn't press further for now. That night, while most of the Kaelith rested, or whatever passed for rest among them, Elias crept out of his quarters and began exploring on his own. He followed Lyric's guidance through narrow alleys and hidden passageways until he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A vast underground chamber filled with pods containing humans. Thousands of them floated in some kind of stasis, their faces serene, yet unervingly lifeless. "What the hell is this?" Elias whispered aloud. Before Lyric could answer or offer any theories, the chamber lit up suddenly as alarms blared around him. The Kaelith had found him. Soren appeared at the entrance to the chamber alongside several others who looked less welcoming than before. "You should not have come here," Soren said quietly, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "What are you doing with them?" Elias demanded angrily, gesturing toward the pods. "They are necessary," Soren replied vaguely before stepping closer. And that's when Elias saw it. Beneath Soren's calm exterior lay something dark and predatory lurking just beneath those shimmering eyes. Elias knew then that he'd made a terrible mistake coming here alone. But retreat wasn't an option anymore. "Lyric," he muttered under his breath as Soren advanced toward him with unnatural speed. "Prep the ship for launch, and get ready for a fight." Elias didn't run immediately. He stood his ground, his mind racing as he stared down Soren and the other Kaelith. Their serene, otherworldly beauty now seemed like a mask barely concealing something far more sinister. The way they moved, graceful yet predatory, set every nerve in his body on edge. "You're going to have to explain this," Elias said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He gestured to the rows of pods containing humans, their bodies suspended in a viscous, glowing liquid. "Why are they here? What do you mean they're necessary?" Soren tilted his head, his shimmering eyes narrowing slightly. "You misunderstand," he said, his tone calm, but carrying an undercurrent of menace. "They are not harmed. They are preserved, sustained." "Preserved for what?" Elias demanded, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Soren didn't reply immediately. Instead, he raised a hand, and the other Kaelith stepped forward in perfect unison, their movements eerily synchronized. Elias instinctively took a step back, his hand drifting toward the sidearm holstered at his hip. "Elias," Lyric's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. "I've detected an energy surge in your vicinity. They're locking down the chamber. You need to move now." Elias gritted his teeth, but didn't bolt just yet. He needed answers. "What are you doing with them?" he asked again, louder this time. Soren's lips curved into what might have been a smile, or perhaps a sneer. "We sustain ourselves," he said simply, as if that explained everything. And then it hit Elias like a punch to the gut. The perfection of the Kaelith, their agelessness, their apparent harmony with their environment, their advanced technology, it all came at a cost. A horrifying cost. "You're feeding on them," Elias said, his voice low but filled with disgust. Soren didn't deny it. "We take only what we need," he said smoothly. "Their essence allows us to exist as we are, eternal, harmonious, without conflict or suffering." "Essence?" Elias spat the word like it was poison. "You mean their lives?" Soren's expression remained unchanged. "They do not suffer," he said, as if that made it better. "Their existence is peaceful." Elias felt bile rise in his throat as he glanced back at the pods. The humans inside looked peaceful. Yes, but they were prisoners nonetheless, their lives stolen to sustain these creatures who spoke of harmony and balance while committing unspeakable atrocities. "You're monsters," Elias said through clenched teeth. Soren's serene facade finally cracked. His eyes darkened, shifting from their shimmering iridescence to an oily black that seemed to swallow the light around him. "We are what we must be," Soren said coldly. "And you are an anomaly." The other Kaelith began to close in around Elias, their movements fluid and unervingly silent. Lyric's voice buzzed urgently in his ear. "Elias, they're not just locking down this chamber. They're sealing off the entire settlement perimeter. If you don't get out now... I know. Elias snapped, drawing his sidearm and firing a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the gun echoed through the chamber, startling even the Kaelith for a moment. But only for a moment. Soren's lips curled back in what could only be described as a snarl. "You cannot escape," he said darkly. "You will join them, or you will feed us." Elias didn't wait for him to elaborate. He turned and bolted toward the nearest exit, firing over his shoulder as he ran. The Kaelith pursued him with terrifying speed and coordination, their movements almost insect-like as they darted between the pods and along the walls. "Lyric!" Elias shouted as he sprinted down a narrow corridor that seemed to twist and shift around him like a living thing. "Tell me you've got an exit plan." "I'm working on it," Lyric replied sharply. "Your ship systems are still rebooting from their interference field. I need another 90 seconds. "I don't have 90 seconds. Elias growled as he rounded a corner and nearly collided with another group of Kaelith blocking his path. He skidded to a halt and raised his sidearm again, firing several shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck their targets but seemed to have little effect. The Kaelith staggered briefly but quickly regained their composure, their shimmering skin knitting itself back together almost instantly. "Great," Elias muttered under his breath as he backed away slowly. "They're bulletproof too." "They're not invincible," Lyric interjected quickly. "Their regenerative abilities rely on energy reserves. If you can deplete those reserves..." "Yeah? And how do I do that?" Elias interrupted as he fired another shot at one of the advancing Kaelith. "Working on it," Lyric snapped. Elias didn't wait for her to finish her calculations. He turned and bolted again, this time heading for what looked like an access hatch leading deeper underground. It wasn't ideal. He'd be cornering himself, but at least it would buy him some time while Lyric figured out how to disable these things. The hatch led to another chamber, this one smaller and less polished than the others he'd seen so far. It looked like some kind of storage area filled with strange devices and containers that pulsed faintly with light. "Lyric," Elias said breathlessly as he sealed the hatch behind him and began barricading it with whatever he could find. "Tell me you've got something." "I've isolated their energy signatures," Lyric replied after a brief pause. "If you can overload one of those devices in this room, it should create an EMP strong enough to disrupt their regenerative abilities. And probably fry me in the process," Elias muttered grimly as he scanned the room for anything that looked remotely explosive. "You'll survive," Lyric assured him dryly. "Probably." Elias sighed heavily but didn't argue further. Survival was survival, even if it came with long odds. As he worked quickly to rig one of the devices into an improvised explosive, he couldn't shake the image of those humans trapped in stasis pods, their lives stolen by creatures who claimed to be peaceful, but were anything but. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. Humanity wasn't prey, and anyone who thought otherwise would learn that lesson the hard way. The Kaelith wanted to eat him? Fine. But first, he'd make damn sure they choked on it. Elias worked furiously, his hands moving with a precision born of desperation. The alien device in front of him throbbed faintly, its surface smooth and warm to the touch, almost like living flesh. Lyric had walked him through the process of overloading it, though she'd been less than reassuring about the odds of success or survival. "Just to be clear," Elias muttered as he twisted a glowing filament free from the device's core, "this thing isn't going to vaporize me along with them, right?" There was a brief pause before Lyric responded. "Define vaporize," Elias groaned. "You're really not helping." "I'm just saying," Lyric replied, her tone maddeningly calm. "There's a non-zero chance this could backfire spectacularly. But hey, you're the one who wanted to play hero. Remind me to uninstall your sarcasm module when we get out of this." Elias grumbled as he yanked another component free. The device began to hum louder, its light intensifying until it bathed the entire chamber in an eerie blue glow. The pounding on the hatch behind him grew louder. The Kaelith were relentless, their synchronized movements creating a rhythmic thud that reverberated through the room like a drumbeat of impending doom. Elias could hear their voices now, low and melodic, yet tinged with something primal and hungry. "You cannot escape," Soren's voice echoed from the other side of the hatch. "You are alone, Elias Voss. There is no one coming for you. No one to save you." Elias clenched his jaw, refusing to let the words sink in. He knew Soren was right. There was no cavalry on its way, no fleet of human ships waiting just beyond the horizon. He was alone in this galaxy, the only human for light years in any direction. But that didn't mean he was helpless. "Lyric," Elias said as he finished rigging the device. "How much longer until this thing blows?" 30 seconds, Lyric replied. "Give or take. Good enough?" Elias grabbed his sidearm and took cover behind a stack of alien containers just as the hatch gave way with a deafening crash. The Kaelith poured into the room like liquid mercury, their shimmering forms moving with an unnatural fluidity that made Elias's stomach churn. Soren led the charge, his eyes now fully black and his expression devoid of any trace of warmth or civility. "There is no need for violence," Soren said as he stepped forward, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "Surrender yourself, and your end will be painless." Elias barked out a laugh as he leveled his sidearm at Soren's chest. "Yeah? How about you come over here and we'll talk about it?" Soren tilted his head slightly, as if considering the offer, then lunged forward with blinding speed. Elias fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The first 2 missed, but the third struck Soren square in the chest, sending him staggering backward. The wound began to heal almost instantly, but it bought Elias enough time to dive for cover as the other Kaelith closed in. "Lyric!" Elias shouted over the din of approaching footsteps. "Tell me this thing is ready." 5 seconds. Lyric replied sharply. Elias didn't wait for a countdown. He grabbed a nearby container and hurled it toward the advancing Kaelith before sprinting toward the far end of the room. The container exploded on impact, releasing a cloud of shimmering gas that momentarily disoriented his pursuers. The device detonated a heartbeat later. The blast wasn't particularly loud. It was more like a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to shake reality itself. The light from the device flared brilliantly before collapsing inward, leaving behind an oppressive silence that made Elias's ears ring. When he finally dared to look back, he saw that several of the Kaelith had collapsed to the ground, their bodies twitching spasmodically as if caught in some kind of feedback loop. Their shimmering skin had dulled to an ashen gray, and their movements were sluggish and uncoordinated. "It worked," Lyric said after a moment, her voice tinged with surprise. "Their regenerative abilities are offline for now." "For now," Elias repeated grimly as he reloaded his sidearm. "They'll adapt," Lyric warned him. "It's what they do." Soren was already proving her right. Though visibly weakened by the blast, he was still on his feet, and still very much a threat. His black eyes locked onto Elias with an intensity that made every hair on his body stand on end. "You think this changes anything?" Soren snarled, his voice losing its melodic quality and taking on a guttural edge. "You are one man against an entire species." "Yeah," Elias retorted as he took aim again. "Then I guess I'd better make it count." He fired another volley of shots, this time aiming for Soren's legs. The bullets struck true, shattering bone and sending the Kaelith leader crashing to the ground with a roar of pain and fury. But even as Soren fell, more Kaelith poured into the chamber, dozens of them, their shimmering forms filling every available space like an unstoppable tide. "Elias," Lyric said urgently, "you need to move. There's too many." "I know." Elias snapped as he ducked behind another stack of containers. He could feel exhaustion creeping in now, the weight of constant motion and adrenaline taking its toll. But he couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. Elias fought with everything he had, his sidearm, his fists, even improvised weapons scavenged from the alien storage room. But it was clear that he couldn't hold out forever. The Kaelith were relentless, not just physically, but mentally as well. Their voices filled his head like a chorus of whispers and screams all at once, each one urging him to give up, to surrender himself to their will. "You cannot win," Soren's voice echoed in his mind, even as his body lay broken on the ground nearby. "You are alone." Elias gritted his teeth and forced himself to focus on Lyric's voice instead, the one anchor keeping him grounded amidst the chaos. "There's an auxiliary exit 2 levels down," she told him urgently. "If you can reach it, I'll reach it," Elias interrupted firmly as he slammed another clip into his sidearm. "Just keep talking me through this." He fought his way toward the exit with grim determination, every step feeling like a victory in itself against overwhelming odds. He knew this was only the beginning, that escaping this chamber wouldn't end the fight but merely delay it. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered was surviving, and making sure these creatures learned what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to its limits. Because if they thought they could break him, they were dead wrong. Elias didn't know how long he'd been fighting. Minutes? Hours? Time had become a blur of motion, gunfire, and the alien screams of the Kaelith. His body ached with every movement, his muscles burning from exertion, but he refused to stop. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything depended on him. The auxiliary exit Lyric had mentioned was still 2 levels below, and every step toward it felt like wading through quicksand. The Kaelith were everywhere, pouring out of hidden passageways, dropping from ceilings, and emerging from walls that seemed to reshape themselves to their will. Their shimmering forms were no longer as pristine as they had been when Elias first arrived. The EMP blast had dulled their glow, and their movements were slower, less fluid. But they were still dangerous, lethal in their coordination and sheer numbers. "Elias," Lyric's voice crackled in his ear as he ducked behind a fallen support beam to reload. "I'm detecting structural instability in this area. If you keep firing indiscriminately." Noted, Elias interrupted as he slammed a fresh clip into his sidearm. "But unless you've got a better idea, I'm sticking with indiscriminate." He popped up from cover and fired 3 quick shots, taking down 2 Kaelith who had been closing in on his position. Their bodies crumpled to the ground, twitching as their regenerative abilities struggled to kick back in. "Your weapon isn't going to hold out much longer," Lyric warned him. "You're running low on ammo." "I'll manage," Elias muttered through gritted teeth as he grabbed a nearby shard of alien metal, sharp and jagged, and tucked it into his belt as a makeshift blade. The Kaelith were adapting, just as Lyric had predicted. They moved cautiously now, spreading out to flank him rather than charging head-on. Their voices filled the air, a haunting symphony of whispers and chants that seemed to reverberate inside Elias's skull. "You are delaying the inevitable," Soren's voice echoed in his mind, cold and unyielding. "You cannot defeat us. Surrender, and we will grant you mercy." "Mercy?" Elias barked out a laugh as he vaulted over the support beam and drove his makeshift blade into the chest of an advancing Kaelith. The creature let out a guttural hiss before collapsing in a heap. "You got a funny way of showing mercy." He pressed forward, weaving through the chaos with a mix of brute force and sheer determination. The auxiliary exit was close now. He could feel it, but the Kaelith weren't going to let him leave without a fight. As he reached the edge of the chamber, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath him. Dust and debris rained down from above as cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. "Lyric!" Elias shouted over the noise. "What's happening?" "The structural instability I mentioned earlier," Lyric replied dryly. "You might want to pick up the pace." "No kidding," Elias muttered as he sprinted toward the exit. The corridor beyond was narrow and winding, its walls lined with more of the strange organic metal material that seemed to define Kaelith architecture. It pulsed faintly with light, as if alive, a reminder that this entire place was more than just a structure. It was part of them. Elias didn't have time to dwell on that thought. The Kaelith were still on his heels, their pursuit relentless despite their weakened state. He could hear their footsteps echoing behind him, growing louder with each passing second. "Lyric," he said breathlessly as he rounded another corner. "Tell me there's something useful at the end of this tunnel." "There is," Lyric replied after a brief pause. "A control node for their planetary infrastructure." "And what now?" Elias asked, skidding to a halt as he reached an open chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. "It's essentially their central nervous system," Lyric explained quickly. "If you can disable it, or better yet, take control. You'll have leverage. Leverage? Elias repeated skeptically as he scanned the room for anything resembling a weapon or tool. Their entire civilization is networked through this system, Lyric continued. Shut it down, and you cripple them. Elias didn't need to be told twice. He approached one of the consoles cautiously, his sidearm still drawn in case any Kaelith decided to ambush him. The interface was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, a swirling mass of light and symbols that seemed to shift and change constantly. It wasn't designed for human use, that much was clear. Lyric, Elias said urgently, I'm going to need your help with this. Already on it, Lyric replied as she interfaced with the console through his suit's systems. The holograms flickered briefly before stabilizing, their patterns becoming more coherent under Lyric's guidance. This is complex, she admitted after a moment, but I think I can override it. You'd better hurry, Elias said grimly as he heard footsteps approaching from behind. He turned just in time to see Serene enter the chamber, flanked by half a dozen other Kaelith. Despite his injuries, Serene still radiated an aura of authority and menace. You have nowhere left to run, Serene said coldly. This ends here. Elias raised his sidearm again, but didn't fire immediately. He needed to buy Lyric time and himself some breathing room. You talk too much, Elias said flatly before pulling the trigger. The shot missed its mark but forced Serene and his followers to scatter momentarily. A small victory, but one that gave Elias precious seconds to reposition himself near another console. Lyric, he shouted over the sound of approaching footsteps. Tell me you're close. Almost there, she replied sharply. The battle that followed was brutal, a chaotic melee of gunfire, blades, and fists as Elias fought desperately to hold off the Kaelith while Lyric worked her magic on the control node. He took hits, more than he cared to count, but somehow managed to stay on his feet through sheer force of will. Finally, mercifully, Lyric's voice crackled in his ear again. Got it. The system is ours. Elias didn't hesitate. He activated the override sequence Lyric had prepared without even fully understanding what it would do. The effect was immediate and devastating. The entire chamber lit up with blinding light as power surged through the control node systems. The Kaelith screamed, a sound unlike anything Elias had ever heard before, as their bodies convulsed violently under the strain of whatever feedback loop Lyric had triggered. When it was over, when the light finally faded and silence returned, Elias found himself standing alone amidst a sea of fallen Kaelith. He staggered toward one of the consoles for support, his body trembling from exhaustion, but his mind racing with adrenaline-fueled clarity. You did it, Lyric said softly after a moment. Elias nodded weakly, but didn't reply immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward one of the holographic displays still active on the console in front of him. A map showing what appeared to be planetary infrastructure networks spanning every corner of this world. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was conquest. And if these creatures thought they could prey on humanity, they were about to learn what it meant when humanity fought back. And won. Elias Voss returned to Earth as a man transformed, not just by the horrors he had faced, but by the triumphs he had achieved. His ship, battered and scarred from its journey, descended into Earth's atmosphere like a phoenix rising from its ashes, a symbol of humanity's relentless will to survive and conquer. The world waited with bated breath as news of his return spread. He had ventured alone into the unknown, fought an alien species, and now brought back something that could change the course of human history forever. When Elias stepped out of his ship onto the landing platform at a secure research facility, he carried with him more than just the story of his survival. Packed into reinforced containers were samples of alien materials harvested from the Kaelith planet, raw resources that defied human understanding. The scientists who greeted him were a mix of awe and skepticism, their minds racing with questions about what he had discovered. The first container was opened under strict quarantine protocols. Inside was a shimmering, translucent substance that seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light. Elias had seen it used by the Kaelith to repair their structures and heal their wounds. They called it Luminex, he explained to the gathered researchers. It's not just a material. It's alive, in some way we don't understand yet. The scientists were quick to analyze it. Within days, they discovered that Luminex was a bioorganic compound capable of self-repairing at the molecular level. It could revolutionize medicine, allowing for instant wound healing and even organ regeneration. Engineers saw potential applications in constructing self-repairing spacecraft and buildings that could adapt to environmental conditions. But Luminex was only the beginning. Elias also brought back samples of Kaelith alloy, a metallic substance with properties unlike anything found on Earth. It was stronger than titanium, yet lighter than aluminum, with a thermal resistance that made it impervious to extreme heat or cold. Metallurgists theorized it could be used to create next-generation spacecraft capable of withstanding the harshest conditions in space exploration. Then there were the biological samples, plants and microorganisms native to the Kaelith planet. One particular plant, which Elias had nicknamed Verdant Flame, emitted a steady glow in low-light conditions and produced oxygen at an astonishing rate. Biologists speculated it could be used to terraform inhospitable environments or create self-sustaining habitats on other planets. But not all discoveries were so benign. Among the samples was a vial containing traces of what Elias called Kaelith essence. This substance was what the Kaelith had extracted from their human captives, the very thing they had intended to take from him before he turned the tables on them. It was a concentrated form of bioenergy, capable of powering their advanced technology and sustaining their seemingly eternal lives. The implications were staggering and terrifying. This is what they were after, Elias told the scientists as they examined the vial under heavy containment measures. It's why they kept those humans in stasis pods. They weren't just feeding on them. They were harvesting them. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. The scientists quickly realized that while Kaelith essence held incredible potential as an energy source, its ethical implications were nightmarish. To harness its power would mean replicating the Kaelith's methods, something humanity could never condone. Yet its existence raised uncomfortable questions about what humanity might do if pushed far enough. Elias didn't stay long at the research facility. He had done his part by bringing back these discoveries. Now it was up to others to decide how they would be used. But even as he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that his battle wasn't truly over. The materials he had brought back were gifts and curses in equal measure. They represented humanity's first real step into becoming a galactic power, but they also carried with them the shadow of what he had fought against: exploitation, domination, and greed. Months passed as scientists worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of Elias's discoveries. Luminex became the foundation for medical breakthroughs that saved millions of lives. Kaelith alloy revolutionized engineering and space exploration, enabling humanity to build ships capable of reaching further into the cosmos than ever before. But it was Verdant Flame that captured imaginations worldwide. Entire cities were transformed by its ability to purify air and provide sustainable energy through photosynthesis-like processes. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, life could thrive. Yet not everyone saw these discoveries as purely benevolent. Corporations and governments vied for control over Kaelith essence, despite its ethical implications. Secret projects sprang up around the globe as factions sought ways to replicate its power without resorting to harvesting human life, or so they claimed. Elias watched from afar as humanity grappled with these newfound powers. He knew better than anyone what was at stake. He had seen firsthand what happened when technology outpaced morality. And so, when whispers began to emerge about strange disappearances near certain research facilities, when rumors spread about experiments involving unwilling test subjects, Elias knew it was time to act. He hadn't fought an entire alien species just to see humanity repeat their mistakes. Gathering allies from among those who shared his vision for a better future, Elias set out on a new mission. Not one of exploration or conquest, but one of vigilance and accountability. Because if there was one thing he had learned during his time on the Kaelith planet, it was this: humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, it was fighting for its soul. And Elias Voss wasn't about to let it lose that battle without a fight.